And look, this is a civil rights issue. And if you are not willing to support transgender people for their sake, at least do it for your own. Because we've been through this before. We know how this thing ends. If you take the anti-civil rights side and deny people access to something they're entitled to, history is not going to be kind to you.
What exactly are transgendered rights? When people refer to this, they can't simply be referring to the fact that transgender people have the same rights that everyone else has. Because if that were true, then why would we need specific transgender rights? So in this video, I ask, what are transgender rights? And where do they supposedly come from? Now, where is it that individual rights come from? The Declaration of Independence says that the rights are given to us from God. However, today most lawyers would tell you that the rights come from the US Constitution. Searching through the Constitution, you will not find the word gender mentioned even once. The word sex is mentioned only a single time. And you know where that is? In the 19th Amendment. You know, the one that gave women the right to vote? So if the Constitution does not discuss gender, how can any transgender rights originate from it? Number 1. Griswold vs. Connecticut. In the 1960s, it was discovered that giving women female hormones could prevent pregnancy. Its use, however, did not fit right with certain groups, chief amongst those groups being the Catholics. This is because, number 1, Catholics recognize the fact that casual sex outside of marriage was a vice. They, of course, were 100% correct on this. Even an atheist who believes casual sex should be permitted has to admit that someone preoccupying themselves with a fleeting physical pleasure at the possible cost of health would be engaging in a vice. Number 2. In addition to the risk of STDs and other diseases inherent in casual sex, the female hormone pills posed other health risks to women. These included an increased risk of cancer, increased risk of cardiovascular disease, a loss of sexual desire, depression, and even blood clots. So when some states banned birth control pills, the federal government respected those states' decision by applying the principle of federalism from which our constitutional republic is based on.
Isn't that cute? But it's wrong!
No. The court instead declared that the Constitution protects the rights of people who use birth control pills. But of course, the Constitution does not mention birth control pills. The Supreme Court had a response to this. Ah, yes, that is because birth control didn't exist back then. Of course, the Founding Fathers would want to have this put in the Constitution if they had only known about it. After all, just look at the Fourth Amendment.
The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched, and the persons or things to be seized.
Okay, so because the Founding Fathers opposed unreasonable searches and seizures, they therefore would have said birth control must be legal? But what about the 10th Amendment?
The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people.
Thanks to Griswold versus Connecticut, we now all have the ability to engage in casual sex. This has, of course, led us down the path to our current reality, which is where we're at now, a society where no one has sex anymore, and men and women hate each other. But hey, it's just condoms, guys. It's not like this decision would radically upend our laws, our society, and our entire culture, right? Number 2, Roe versus Wade. So we're in the 70s now, and women are getting abortions. So some states start banning abortions, while others allow it. Does the federal government respect the sovereignty of the states, like the 10th Amendment suggests that it must? Of course not. Thanks to Roe versus Wade, we all know that the Constitution protects the right to an abortion, even though somehow magically the Constitution never mentions the word abortion. Is this another new secret right that the Founding Fathers would have given us if only they had been aware of it? Yeah, about that. Number 1. America's Founding Fathers were part of a movement called the Enlightenment. This movement believed that Europeans could advance their knowledge by reading and expanding upon the philosophy of ancient Greece and Rome. Number 2. To the Founding Fathers, America was to be a democratic republic, made in the image of Athens or Rome. That's why many of our government buildings, like the Supreme Court, were made to look like they were built in ancient Athens. Number 3. One book the Founding Fathers would certainly have had knowledge of was Plato's Republic. It's one of the most influential books in all of ancient philosophy. The book documents Socrates as he attempts to describe the ideal form of government. In book number 5, Plato describes how Socrates believes sexuality should be handled in the ideal city. Number 1. Women should be equal to men. Female athletes competing for the Olympics should therefore wrestle naked alongside the men as equals. Number 2. Women should be allowed to become soldiers. Men must be equally prepared to kill female soldiers as they are male soldiers. They should also be as willing to come to the aid of a fellow male soldier as they would a fellow female soldier wounded in battle. Number 3. Women and men should have frequent casual sex and not form any romantic relationships. Any children they birth shall be raised by bureaucrats. The children's lineage shall be kept a secret. Number 4. Abortion and even the practice of infanticide should be permitted. The practice of abortion was so old that even Socrates talked about it. Most of the Founding Fathers would have been familiar with Plato's Republic, but none of Socrates' ideas were ever put into the US Constitution. The Founding Fathers probably found these ideas to be utterly disgusting. Yet somehow here we are with female soldiers, children being raised by bureaucrats, casual sex outside of marriage be commonplace, and abortion on demand. The idea that the Founding Fathers were ignorant of abortion and therefore did not include it in the Bill of Rights is absurd. But now the Supreme Court can simply bypass that argument by saying that it's extending what it earlier found in Griswold versus Connecticut to the fact pattern of Roe versus Wade. Number 3, Lawrence versus Texas. It's 2003. These two men have been charged with sodomy after a police officer walked in on them having butt sex. That image will be permanently burned into the mind of that officer for the rest of his life. Now, surely the Supreme Court could not say that the Founding Fathers forgot to put sodomy as one of the rights protected by the Bill of Rights. That would not only be obviously wrong, but embarrassingly so. It would make the US Constitution look like a meaningless joke of a document. But of course, that's exactly what happened. Sodomy became our newest constitutional right, just another extension of Griswold versus Connecticut. It's important to note here that the Supreme Court could have avoided making sodomy a right and still bailed these two guys out. It could have ruled that sodomy laws discriminated against gay people, and therefore sodomy laws violated the Equal Protection Clause. The Supreme Court chose not to do this, however. Instead, it ruled in their favor by making sodomy into a constitutional right. Number 4. OBERGEFELL versus HODGES. Obama is now the president. It's no longer enough that states have to allow birth control, have to allow abortion on demand, and be permissive of gay sex. The institution of marriage itself has to be destroyed. So the Democrats start putting up ballot propositions. Legalize gay marriage now. And they fail. All of them fail. Even in liberal states like California, everyone votes against gay marriage. Nobody wants gay marriage. Do the Democrats respect the 10th Amendment and accept that we live in a democratic country under the principle of federalism? Of course not. They demand that the Supreme Court find that the Constitution gives individuals the right to a gay marriage. Now, marriage is not mentioned anywhere in the Constitution at all. Of course, this did not preclude the court from finding a U.S. constitutional right to a gay marriage in light of the fact that it had earlier found a right to possess birth control pills. In doing so, the Supreme Court majority opinion writes that the Constitution protects a liberty that includes certain specific rights that allow persons within a lawful realm to define and express their identity. Now we've finally arrived at transgender rights. If individuals have a right to define and express their identity under the U.S. Constitution, as OBERGEFELL says they do, then this must also be true of transgendered people. But there have never been any laws against cross-dressing. When it came to hormones and surgery, the government was never involved in that at all. It left all of that up to medical doctors. So when these people advocate for transgender rights, what exactly are they hoping to achieve? Number 1. The right to change genders in situations where doctors or psychologists don't think it would be appropriate to do so, such as the case with young children. Number 2. The right to have taxpayers pay for various cosmetic surgeries when transgender people are on welfare or locked up in prisons or jails. Now, these surgeries can cost over $100,000. Number 3. The right to participate in sex-segregated activities like athletic competitions, despite it being completely inappropriate for a wide variety of reasons. Number 4. The right to the presumption of discrimination inherent in the protections of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. No reasonable person should ever want to support a toxic agenda like this. The craziest thing, though, to me, is how many of these people who are demanding transgender rights are the same radically anti-Christian, atheist types who mock religious people for believing in myths. You do realize that every single thing about transgender constitutional rights is a myth, right? Every step that preceded it was based on a myth, a distortion, or a lie. The idea that you can say with a straight face that the U.S. Constitution includes secret constitutional rights for transgendered people is nothing but a ridiculous farce. You might as well say things like dragons are real. The only reason we're even talking about transgender rights these days is because wealthy globalist types managed to find a way to co-opt the Supreme Court so that it legislates their moral values on the rest of the country. This is the same way that this same group of people managed to use the European Union to achieve the exact same goal in Europe. Now, if the Constitution really does provide an individual the right to express their identity, then why is it that men don't have the right to take steroids in order to better express their gender identity? Why aren't women on welfare entitled to taxpayer money to use for breast augmentation? Why aren't ugly people also permitted to use taxpayer money to help them express their sexuality more often? Anyways, that's all I've got for you today. If you like this video and you're not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please subscribe.